Hi, I'm Terry Mulligan, a Splunk consultant with Discovered Intelligence. We're a leader in data observability and security platform sales and services with a team of fully certified Cribl and Splunk consultants ready to assist our customers in achieving success. For the last 4 years, I've been on contract with a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company as a Splunk data engineer. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about how we've added Cribl Stream to the mix, what Cribl's brought to the table, and how it's changed our processes and the role of the Splunk data engineer. The benefits of embracing Cribl have been truly amazing, and it is a game changer. The power of Cribl has certainly energized this old dog. Let me give you a high overview of the Splunk data engineering role. We're responsible for onboarding Splunk sources. The role's technical, but if you can master the magic gate, become proficient with Linux and regex, understand syslog-ng, 90% of the ingestions are fairly straightforward. Once you've developed those skills, the role becomes process-driven. I didn't find the role boring, but after a while, the challenges are few and far between. And as the name implies, we only deal with data destined for Splunk. We work directly with internal customers and stakeholders. The onboarding could be a new data source, or we could be brought into a PLC where ultimately they need the logs in Splunk, but need to understand the cost to do so. Once a request is received, we define the data requirements, the collection methods, execute a viability review, and begin the ingestion process. Before the arrival of Cribl, which I call the BC era, the data onboarding process usually went something like this. A customer, in my case other teams within the company, submits a request. A quick Teams meeting is held, and the customer provides information about sizing, locations, and data type. A review process then begins to determine the viability of the data. This really is not a technical viability test, more of a value test. Does the value of the data exceed the initial and ongoing ingestion costs? Is it license worthy? In my opinion, there are two reasons why requests are rejected. First, data bloat. In most sources, only 5% of the data is interesting, but it comes with the baggage of the remaining 95%. The 5% is often not valuable enough to justify the cost of the 95%. This is a licensing issue. Second, bespoke data requests. These are for data sources that cannot be ingested using regular tools like a universal forwarder, HEC, or a TA. These requests usually come with, hey, the software's got an API available. That's great, but the customer doesn't understand that building, testing, and deploying a TA can take at least 5 days. And the development costs pushes the request into the non-viable category. This is a development cost issue. Now, in the BC era, because we didn't have any tools to shave development time or tools to remove unnecessary data, the Splunk data engineer would have to deliver the unpleasant news that we would not be proceeding. If the data passes the viability test, the onboarding process is kicked into gear. We'd set up the ingestion, we'd create the knowledge objects for SIM and enrichment purposes, we'd set up monitoring and create the documentation. Then we'd move on to the next request. We set it and forgot about it. That is, unless we got a call from the customer saying, hey, the data's not easily searchable, it's too embedded, I can't see the forest for the trees, can you clean it up? And now we'd have to deliver more bad news. Sorry, there isn't much we can do to simplify the data. And so in summary, we'd have to reject requests in the BC era due to licensing or upfront development cost. We couldn't just bring in the valuable data or cost-effectively ingest the bespoke data. And when we did bring in data, our ability to transfer the data into useful data was severely limited. And then along came Cribl Stream. Once we added Cribl Stream to our arsenal, everything changed. I call this the AC era, after Cribl. Now we have a tool that gives us the power to drop the bloat and only ingest the interesting data. Ingest API data in hours instead of days. Tame the data. And we can decouple source and destination, providing multi-destination routing. And with our new capabilities, the Splunk data engineering role became more challenging and interesting. The conversations we're having with customers have changed. They're no longer quick Teams calls, but an in-depth conversation where we drill into the needs, goals, and use cases. And the sorry answers have turned into yes, let's see what we can do. At the beginning of the migration, Cribl was a novelty for some team members. It seemed to be an afterthought for them. Oh, maybe I should have put it through Cribl. As Cribl proved itself repeatedly, it no longer became an afterthought. Now Cribl is our default ingestion point for all new data sources. We no longer send any data directly to Splunk. Cribl has become a verb. Criblize the data. In my opinion, all data can benefit from Cribl. It could be the ease of ingestion, reduction, transformation, or the ability to deliver to multiple platforms. Cribl adds value to all ingestions. Now, the AC era isn't all roses. Creating and tweaking pipelines can be intoxicating and a rabbit hole. The questions we now have to deal with are, how much time do we spend on Criblization? How much reduction or transformation do we apply? When is the pipeline good enough? But I think you will all agree that these questions are much nicer to have than the problems we faced in the BC era. To ensure the success of our project in the beginning, we focused on features of Cribl Stream that would provide immediate results and let it shine. For data volume reduction, we targeted data sources where we knew we could achieve significant reductions, and we reduced our license by 3 terabytes. For hardware reduction, we migrated our syslog data sources from syslog ng to Cribl and eliminated 14 servers. For data viability, we ingested some previously non-viable data sources using the REST collector. These successes provided great talking points for senior leadership and reinforced the decision to purchase Cribl. Once we had these successes under our belt, we were able to move on to some backlog items that were previously impossible. Primarily, these data sources had GDPR concerns. But with the flexibility of Cribl masking, these became viable. And now, we've added existing inputs into our focus, migrating these to route through Cribl instead of the Splunk gateways. One of our more interesting success moments was our ingestion of App Omni data. When we first brought this data source on, it was targeted after Criblization to be approximately a 200 gig a day source, and it was like that way for a few months. Then, the App Omni team expanded their footprint, and overnight it jumped to a terabyte. This was a huge licensing issue. But because App Omni was routed via Cribl, we rerouted all the data to Chronicle, a destination platform where we don't have a license restriction, and we only sent a very small subset to Splunk. The power of Cribl to route data to multiple pipelines and destinations saved the day. In the remaining slides, I would like to share with you my experiences from this journey in the form of best practices, tips and tricks, and lessons learned. Some of the more evident best practices are: first, leadership support is key. Weaponize your leadership with dashboards and regular updates. Make sure the successes and benefits of Cribl are clear. And second, define measurable and attainable goals, such as reduce license volume by X amount, reduce your hardware footprint, move long-term storage to a different platform. Training. Everyone should take advantage of Cribl University and the free training courses. Time spent on training will pay dividends. Even if a team member isn't using Cribl, they should at least understand the capabilities of Cribl. And plan early, and continue to review the plan. Take advantage of the reference architectures and the sizing calculators, and keep reviewing these resources. They're updated as new information becomes available. Plan your architecture. Will it be on-prem, cloud, or a mixed environment? Does your company require HR or DR? Are you using AWS? Will you be using availability zones or auto-scaling? Do as much of this planning before building a Cribl production environment. Our initial deployment plan didn't consider availability zones, and while we did backfill this feature, the backfill brought additional challenges. After converting the load balancers to have 2 availability zones, their FQDN returned 2 IP addresses instead of 1, and all the firewall rules had to be updated. Now, this doesn't seem too difficult, but in a multinational environment with many firewalls all across the world, this involves submitting many change requests. And this additional work could have been avoided. Naming conventions. Before deploying Cribl, define naming conventions for everything, such as sources, destinations, pipelines, and lookups. A consistent, organized set of pipelines is so much easier to work with than a mishmash of pipelines following different naming standards. And include worker groups in your convention. If you plan on having multiple worker groups, make the names meaningful and representative of the group's purpose: staging, push, and pull. Staging environment. I can't recommend a staging environment enough. Have an environment where everybody can learn, test, and experiment without fear of impacting production is vital for the success of your migration. A change control process controls our production environment. And while this is great for stability, it does not lend itself to learning, developing, and testing. Now, our solution was to build a staging worker group. This worker group doesn't require change controls, and it's available for the whole team. They can install packs, create pipelines, test new techniques, and develop their skills. Within the staging group, everyone can commit as frequently as they want, and again, no change controls required. We've even taken this a step beyond and updated our onboarding SOP to always use staging before production. Now, all new data sources are initially routed to staging, with a destination of a non-production index accessible only to our team. We use staging to criblize the data. This is where event breakers and pipelines are created, tested, and reviewed. And once we've criblized the data, we adjust the destination to a non-production index that the customer can access and they can review the data. Once the data has passed the customer review process, a change control is executed to set up the configuration on the production worker group, and then the data is rerouted to production. As I mentioned, the staging group has been a key resource for our team to develop our Cribl skills. Print out the quick reference guide. It's a terrific resource that will save you time. When I started, I just dove in. I didn't take the training, I had no JavaScript experience, and only had a basic understanding of Cribl. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't have the basic knowledge to create pipelines. I spent hours and hours on Google and Slack looking for answers, and I eventually developed my Cribl skills. A few months later, when I came across the quick reference guide, it was a real head slapper. As I read it, I was stunned that I'd spent time researching almost every bit of information in the guide. Transformation rules. Develop a standard set of transformation rules that are automatically applied to all new data sources. These are applied before the customer sees the data in Splunk. We drop null fields. We also drop fields used to set the time field, and if required, we'll recreate it in Splunk with a calculated field. We also shorten field names to codes, and we recreate them in Splunk with aliases and calculated fields. And we convert date-time fields to epoch, and if required, recreate them in Splunk. We flatten embedded JSON and then simplify the data. We also take advantage of Cribl's automatic syslog parser in a couple of ways. We ingest the message field instead of raw. And by dropping the syslog header, we're automatically saving 10 to 15%. We stuff the app name, severity, and priority fields into the source field since it's no longer being used for a log name. And in Splunk, extract these into separate fields. This is information that our customers didn't have easy access to before, and we're seeing it being used more and more in searches. Lookups. Leverage them when possible. They're extremely powerful and simple to use. I use them for field renaming. I implement a lookup in the pipeline if I have more than 10 fields that need to be renamed. It's an elegant and efficient technique. I also use them to fix events with time fields that don't specify a time zone. A great example of this is the Windows event logs. I created a lookup table with a list of hosts in their appropriate time zone. In the pipeline, I execute a lookup function that passes the host and returns the time zone. It's simple and efficient. This technique isn't just used for Windows events. Being a multinational pharmaceutical company, we receive network events from devices located all over the world. And although they're all supposed to be set to GMT, I can tell from the index time that more than half are not. I use the same lookup technique to fix the times on these network events. Develop a pipeline standard. These standards will help you avoid problems. Our standard now includes a rule that states all index or source type rewriting should be done purposely with their own eval function and not mixed in with another eval. This rule was created because we had a pipeline where an index rewrite was added to the last eval function, the eval where you typically clean up the event before ingestion. And a few months later, a new team member was assigned to move this data source to a production index. And instead of removing the index rewrite, they turned off the eval function. This caused all the data to get pushed to Splunk as index extracted. And once the data volume increased, the indexer started to run hot. Another rule we have is comments. I know documenting isn't popular and could seem meaningless in some cases, but comments come in handy when reviewing a pipeline after a few months, or if it isn't your pipeline. The pack dispensary. Take advantage of the pack dispensary. Packs are powerful. I consider packs as a starting point for any ingestion. If I'm ingesting a data source, someone else has probably done it before and may have published a pack. I generally don't use the pack as is, but I'm going to review it, learn from it, and customize it to fit my needs. Packs also offer another avenue to learn. I constantly review packs to see how others implement a function or resolve a problem. The pack may have nothing to do with my data source, but it solves a similar problem. For example, I learned how to deal with the time zone issue with Windows event logs from the Palo Alto pack. And some packs are just made for learning, such as the Cribl knowledge pack. I'm constantly referring to the time pipeline in this pack. And master event breakers. They provide the functionality that the Magic 8 provides in Splunk, but the execution is much different in Cribl. This was different than what I was used to, and it took me some time for it to become second nature. Truncation behaves differently. The truncated portion of an event isn't dropped. It's passed along, but with an internal variable set. And unless you deal with large events, you may never experience this behavior, but you should be aware of it and know the options for dealing with it. Regex. Not setting the correct flavor in Regex 101 can send you down a path of frustration when your code doesn't return the expected results in Cribl, but works perfectly in Regex 101. Strip time. It's almost identical to the version that Splunk uses, but there are a few differences, and I think I found each one. My hair used to be red before dealing with milliseconds in a pipeline. The default worker group. As the name suggests, it's the default group. Now, you don't have to use it, and you can even remove it, but it will come back after each upgrade. Just something to be aware of. Training. Take the time to do the training. The time invested in the training will pay dividends when working with Cribl. Google and Slack are great, but already knowing is more powerful. And make sure new data sources are routed through Cribl and Criblized. It's so much harder to Criblize a data source after it's started to be used in its raw form. And make Cribl your standard ingestion point and educate your regular customers. Hammer this home with your customers and your team members. Some customers are just used to requesting a HEC token and then letting the data fly in. This behavior needs to stop. We need to educate them that we'll be using Cribl, applying a pipeline, and transforming the data. It's a new process, and they need to be aware of it. And increase your engagement with your customers. It isn't enough to have a quick Teams call to find out the size and location of data. Now you need to have a conversation with the customer to understand their requirements and the use cases for the data. And armed with this information, you can effectively tame the data and achieve the right amount of reduction for the customer and the company. And naming standards are harder to implement after starting. It's very frustrating to me that the destination for Splunk HEC is different in each of our worker groups. In closing out, this slide is a recap of my regrets. I should have taken the courses sooner. I should have reviewed what resources were available to me, and if I did, I would have found the quick reference guide sooner. I should have reviewed the documentation. Even just a quick skim would have been so helpful. And the Cribl Slack community. This is a tremendous platform, and I should have taken advantage of it before I did. The people on the channel are amazing, and a vast amount of information is available. If you have a question, more than likely somebody else has asked the same question and it's been answered. You just need to search for it. And don't confine yourself to just the general channel. Explore the other channels. For example, the feature request channel is so cool. You can easily submit a feature request, and the other channel members can view it. They can add their support and their use cases to the request. This is far superior to the process used by many software companies, where you fill out a web form, hit submit, and then you don't know what happens with the request. And finally, packs. I did not embrace packs soon enough. And my last regret is that I can't build a Cribl pipeline that I can run myself through and get a 20% reduction. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to discuss something further, I'm available on this Slack community channel.